Okay, I think we're going to get started. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome once again to the Student Assessment Office Hours. A couple reminders just to make the afternoon or the next few minutes productive and successful. Please keep in mind that all of you are on mute during the duration of the webinar. We are not monitoring the chat necessarily, so if you have questions, please select the raise your hand button when prompted, and you'll be asked to state your question at the appropriate times during the session. And then also this session is being recorded, and will be reported. That's an assessment term, sorry. So recorded and will be posted to the training page on the CSDE website in the next day or two. As a reminder, these are just our standard office hours we've been doing for a long time. We are covering topics related to Smarter, NGSS, and our alts today. We also sneak in a couple other things today too, if you can find them as we go through the deck, but keep an eye out for some other assessments as well. So as a reminder, my colleagues here on the slide and also here in the meeting today, Christy Alberino, Jeff Gregg, Janet Stuck. Deirdre is not here today, but here's her contact information. And then my name is Abe Christ, the Student Assessment Office at the Performance Office. Also here on the call today are our colleagues from Cambium. Jen Cho in particular is here today. Here's the contact information for their help desk and so on and so forth. I imagine most everybody has all this information at hand already, so we won't spend too much time on it. Again, office hours every Thursday, 3 o'clock. Invite was sent to all district administrators. This is an optional thing, and also feel free to spread the word if you can attend. Any educators really in Connecticut are welcome to attend to hear kind of the latest and greatest of things. So speaking of office hours and professional development, we wanted to make you aware of something that is coming up related to our office that our office is putting on called Behind the Numbers from Data to Dashboards. It's a new series of sessions that I'm going to talk about how data from different sources are incorporated into EdSite, including the next generation accountability reports. There's going to be 3 virtual sessions that offered in the remainder of this school year. The first session about next generation accountability indicators supported by the TCS collection will be on April 21st. You can register for these Behind the Numbers from Data to Dashboard webinars off the link below. Christy's dropped the link to the flyer in the chat, so if you want to register, you can do it then. Again, this is a new series coming from the Performance Office at the CSDE. I mentioned earlier at in this presentation about a little sneaky mentions of other assessments. One of the other assessments we're mentioning today is the CPFA. As a reminder, we are collecting individual student data this year. And the deadline for that submission is June 30th. I don't want to spend too much time on this page necessarily, but I know as coordinators, you often, I would suspect that many of you have an interest in this collection. If you don't, please let your colleagues know that we are pretty serious about the hard close this year, which will be the end of June, maybe a little bit later, but this deadline is a pretty hard deadline this year, so please spread the word about this. Okay, so presentation overview is here. I'm not going to spend too much time on each of these points, but this is what's coming in the deck. Some of these are new things related to what's been done in the previous weeks. Some of them are reminders. A little bit about testing. As of yesterday, we had completed over 48,000 tests started and completed, over 39,000 tests already. So things are moving along. Typically, this is the time of year when things start to heat up. You all in the districts know that pretty well. Our numbers are really increasing day by day very quickly now, and that trend will continue towards the end of May. Couple of reminders. Again, all materials related to our assessments can be found on this portal. Our TAMs and TCMs were delivered at the end of January. So if you're looking for them and you haven't found them, they should be in district somewhere. If you need any extra ones, just call the help desk at 844-202-7583. We've been getting a couple of those every day, I think, from districts needing a couple more. Testing window ends June 2nd. And then one other thing, this year we did have that new test administrator training that was released that we've gotten good feedback. So if you're still training your TAs, feel free to lean on that. About results delivery, I think we've mentioned this in the last couple office hours. The one new nugget that's new this time around, we might have mentioned this the last one too, is the date in which we're targeting the release is May 12th. It is dependent on checks, but May 12th is when your teachers will be able to log into the CRS and see results pretty much instantaneously for NGSS and the ALTs. There is a little bit of a wait for smarter tests. There's up to a 10-day wait from the point that the test was finished, so keep that in mind. But if your tests had finished, sometime in mid-April, there's a good chance you're going to see them when it opens on May 12th. Some PSIS reminders. I'm not even going to spend much time on each of these dot points. It's in the slide deck. All these points have been stated and reiterated multiple times in all our presentations, but if you want a kind of reminder about what's going on for our assessments and how it connects to PSIS, please take a look at this slide. Okay, CT SEDS and TIDE. Janet, do you want to take this slide? Actually, this is where I'm passing it to Janet. So Janet, I'm going to pass the ball to you.
All right, thank you, Abe. So all of you know that we're still working through CT SEDS syncing up with TIDE, and this slide shares some information related to that process. This was shared on our last office hours, but we just kept it in as you're progressing through this process. So we wanted to make sure that you remember that those elements of CT SEDS and TIDE Sync does not apply to the Connecticut SAT school day. Remember, that's still the SSD process, SDD process. And again, only those students who have special education status or 504 indicated on in PSIS will be eligible for accommodations within the TIDE system. And if you weren't aware, the TIDE system is additive, so that when you have your IEP or 504 meeting and things are lined up in there, it will sync with TIDE. But those accommodations and supports that were already in there, maybe you entered them manually for your interims. If they are not in CT SEDS, you'll need to remove them manually, because we want CT SEDS and TIDE to match. So it's critical that you examine that before you test the student. Next slide, please. So these are some additional reminders. You may find some discrepancies. If you have questions about this, feel free to call us. We're still working through some glitches that we're aware of. So you can call us with SACIDs of students and we'll help you investigate what may have occurred. And again, best practice, because we want CT SEDS to be the element of truth, best practice is to wait to make sure that CT SEDS and TIDE are the same. If you have special documented accommodations that you need to remove from TIDE and it's not available to you, give us a call and we'll help you do that. Additional participation reminders. This is same slide we've had before. Just wanted to touch on it in case those of you are new to the office hours. This is the expectation for participation for students in Connecticut. And if you have students who attend out-of-state facilities, we have a document that's linked here on this page for you to refer to on how to make that happen. Again, this is not a new slide. These are a quick link to our manuals that are used to support our teachers administering the assessments, and include scripts in most cases to make sure that we're being standardized in our delivery. A little bit about the CTA and CTAS TAM, in addition to those documents, those teachers who are trained to deliver those alternate assessments, for the CTA, they need to access the directions for test administration, which is a required grade and subject specific script to ensure that their standardized administration of that assessment, and they're available only to those trained TEAs or the DA in the district. Also for CTAA, there is a secure PDF that's grade and subject specific, so that if, for example, you have a student who requires a paper test form or uses accommodations such as an eye gaze board, you can print the paper document and cut their responses so that the student can obviously select their choice on the eye gaze board. It requires a little manipulation on your part, but those paper documents are there for your use. And again, they're only accessible to the trained TEA in their secure inbox. The CTAS TAM is related to our science assessment, which is alternate, and includes references and procedures related to the CTAS, which is for students in grades 5, 8, and 11. And this is a test that's administered throughout the year. And then during this testing window, the student score worksheet is submitted into the data entry interface. And then the TIDE user guide will support you as a DA in creating roles and permissions for your staff. And we still have the district administrator training up for your reference. That's on our training website. And within the portal, there's additional training resources. This slide also indicates some information related to making sure you're fully prepared for testing your students. Just a few reminders about setting, ensuring students have an opportunity to practice so they're familiar with where things are in the site and how to access them. A reminder about ordering paper materials. Those have to be done ahead of time, and don't forget to set it in the TIDE test setting area as well, so the system recognizes that that student is using Braille or large print. You can work with your technology coordinator to make sure that the assistive technology is supported and that your secure browser is updated. And we have a technology guide to define some of these parameters for you. And we encourage you to work with your case managers, again, to check the accommodations and supports prior to testing that student. And for your English learners or ML multilingual learners, we want to make sure that you're including those, supporting those students' language needs in your decision making. We encourage districts to have a district-wide policy and procedures, ensuring that you're making good choices related to the designated supports and who has them and how they're selected for students. A couple more. I wanted to remind you that when you're scheduling test sessions, make sure that you allow for extended time if a particular accommodation is being used that may require additional time, or just in general for some of your students. You can adjust the settings of your test sessions so that your students feel comfortable. You may want to make sure that you're looking at your schedules when you're creating opportunities for makeup tests if students are out. Make sure that you work with your administration to minimize disruptions such as fire drills or announcements. And one of the things that we want to remind you is that if your student is using large print or Braille materials, that you're going to be transcribing those documents into the scannable document. Um, and returning those, transcribing what the student has prepared and then submitting it in the DEI prior to returning those materials to Measurement Incorporated. And last but not least, but what is extremely important is that you remind your proctors that they need to be active proctors, meaning they walk around the room, observe what's happening with the students, which will ultimately save you time and effort and avoid having irregularities and appeals occurring. So we've had some questions related to test settings and whether a student would need individual proctors or have to be tested individually. And the answer is in many cases, individual testing is required, and it's based upon the support or accommodations that's provided to the student. So on this slide, you'll see that, for example, the read aloud designated support or accommodation is one that would be expected to be administered to the student individually, and it's because it would disrupt other students while the proctor is reading to the student or the certified teacher is reading the content to the student. Similarly, if the student has a specialized talking calculator or speech to text, all those are to make sure that their peers are not disrupted during testing. And many of our non-standard special documented accommodations require the one-to-one setting because the structure of the test is different than those students taking it in a standard manner. If students are using the embedded text to speech function, this is something we've had calls about. Um, they can test in the regular test setting if they're using a headset. So you want to provide headphones for those students who are using the embedded text to speech. If they don't have a headset, they must be tested individually. Similarly, this is because the speech to text, the student would be tested one-to-one because they're dictating their responses into the system. And the provision of human signer or human reader, that would also be tested one-to-one. So now we have an opportunity for you to raise your hand if you have questions, and we can unmute you so you can ask the question related to some of the things we've discussed so far. I'm not seeing, oh, well, there was somebody, let's see. Michelle? Um, did we get Michelle unmuted?
You should.
Yep. Okay, there we go.
Okay.
Hi, hi, Janet.
Hi, Michelle.
Just wondering if you guys have heard from any districts. We had one situation where a Spanish read aloud came through in Tide. It was a student, it is a student with an IEP, and nothing in the accommodations that I can see. It's not an EL student, it's just a student with an IEP, and none of the accommodations that are within the finalized IEP have anything to do with Spanish.
That's unusual. So was this student ever an English learner?
No, no, they never
Okay.
were. Yeah. You know, and we've had some problem solving that we've done, but you know, and this is super helpful. What you've provided here, but that's the one that I just couldn't figure out.
That, as you know, we're still working through the system with CT SEDS. If you wouldn't mind, could you send myself and Deidre the SATSIT of that student?
Oh, sure.
And we can kind of work with our colleagues to see if we can troubleshoot how that could have occurred and make sure we
Okay.
avoid it in the future.
Okay. Yeah, and we did have, you know, as the our teachers are still getting used to the CT SED system itself, we've had
Right.
situations where they've sort of selected, they meant like text to speech, read aloud, that's what they really wanted, but they selected read aloud.
Right.
So yeah, and so those we obviously that's on our end and we can figure that piece out. But that there was just a couple, and then there was another one where we had a student who had a finalized IEP in CT SEDS with accommodations, but nothing was pulling over into Tide, and he did have an active IEP icon in PowerSchool. So that was another one that I couldn't figure out, is if there's
In
something I'm missing
PowerSchool?
on that one.
Because
on-
we're not really hooked up with PowerSchool.
I'm sorry, yeah, I'm sorry, in pieces.
Okay. So in CT SEDS, if it has a solid blue star
Yep,
and the implementation date has occurred, it should be syncing.
okay,
We have noticed that when amendments are created, there's some wonkiness sometimes with the dates. So you want to make sure you get the dates separated from the original PPT to the amendment date. They should not be the same.
okay, maybe that's
That-
what it is. Okay,
And
all right,
and
thank you.
I'm still speaking what we think is happening. So don't take that with a grain of salt, because
Okay, well,
we're
at least
still
it's something
working it
to
through.
try.
Yeah, we're hoping to come out with like a companion FAQ or some sort of document to support that process with CT SEDS.
Okay, great, thank you very much, appreciate your help.
Yeah, Janet, that's well put. I mean, I think that that duplicate date is the issue, and as Janet said, we're going to have, we'll probably, our existing FAQ will probably be adding some details on that just to clarify that. Thanks
I
for
don't
the
see
question.
any other questions. So I guess we'll keep going.
Sounds good.
This section is a little more specific about accommodations and our assessments. So this handy dandy chart, you're probably sick of seeing, but it's kind of a cheat sheet for supports and accommodations that are available for Smarter Balance and NGSS. And this is to be used at a surface level, and behind each one of those is information within our assessment guidelines. And it designates what are special documented accommodations, or those that are supporting students that are considered non-standard. And now many of these are already available in CT SEDS. You create an attestation that your student uses it in instruction and needs it based on supporting documentation that are often represented within the IEP. So ultimately, we may no longer need the petition process, but we're working through that too, except for things like customized. So we wanted to remind you, we've had a few calls related to NGSS and selecting that assessment. So again, NGSS is for students, and this is the standard assessment in grade 5, 8, and 11. So it comes in different flavors. You can have it the traditional standard science NGSS. It's also available in Braille and Spanish. So each of those need to be selected individually based on the student's need and what was set up in Tide based on, for example, if they need Braille, you would order Braille materials, and if they need Spanish toggle, that would be set up in Tide, and these would be selected based on that. So your teachers need to know which science assessment the student will be taking. We've had some situations where teachers have selected the standard NGSS, expecting to see Spanish, and they're not sure why it's not there. It's because they selected the traditional test rather than the Spanish. And also related to this, we wanted to make sure that we emphasized the verbiage around the Spanish test. If a student logs in and sees the message, no test available or found, verify that the student has the proper test settings in Tide when you select the test. Although we didn't talk very much about special documented accommodations this time, we wanted to keep this slide in here for reference, because when you're selecting things like scribe, read aloud, human signer, or math manipulatives, there are certain protocols and guidelines that go with each of those, that although you're selecting them maybe in CT SEDS, you still need to follow through with the protocols. And you can access these here. It's also been posted in the Student Assessment News. So we want to make sure you follow through with your teachers who are, for example, acting as a scribe, because there are certain things they need to sign off on. So as you are working through your PPTs and communicating with your PPT systems, we want to make sure that you emphasize what they are selecting for supports and accommodations. Of course, they want to make sure they mirror what the student's receiving in instruction, but we also want to make sure they're not selecting supports and accommodations that are in conflict. So if, for example, embedded text-to-speech is often selected for students, and also non-embedded read aloud. Well, they serve the same function. So we want to make sure that you're selecting the correct one of these options when you're doing the PPT, and keeping in mind that your PPT staff is educated about if the read aloud is selected, that means another person needs to be there to support that child in your scheduling. So we are hoping to create a document of what we would consider business rules during CT SEDS to support this as well. Any other, oh, I do see a raised hand. Let's see.
You should, Alec, you should be able to state your question.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate these office hours. So kind of a slightly new question about the Spanish toggle. So I just had this asked today. Some teachers have been running interim assessments for students that have the Spanish toggle activated. And they, unfortunately, I didn't see the actual, screenshots or tests, but they're saying that that appears as something that once they launch the test, the student can switch between English and Spanish within the test itself. And would that view be identical on the summative? Basically, does that toggle accommodation behave the same way on the summative as it does on the interim?
Maybe Jen can confirm, but I believe it does.
Yes, what you see on the interim is what you're going to see on the summative. So that toggle behavior will be exactly the same.
Thanks,
Amazing.
Jen.
Thank you so much.
Any other questions? Okay.
I don't see any, Janet, so I'll
Okay.
just carry on.
All right. So our next section is about our alternate assessment system. We didn't include the KELP in this area, which is our alternate English language proficiency assessment, because that window has closed. So what we're talking about right now in our window is the CTAA, which is our alternate for English language arts and math, and the Connecticut alternate science assessment for students in grades 5, 8, and 11. Okay, next slide, please. Thank you. So,
Sorry about that.
what?
I said, sorry about that.
Oh, no problem. So you heard me talk a little bit earlier about the secure alternate assessment materials, and this is related to the CTAA. So the test administrator or trained TEA for the alternate would access the secure directions for the test administration for the CTA. And you can see that there are two ways to obtain these. And one is in the secure materials area tab under preparing for testing, or in the individual's secure inbox. So they can access them here and download them onto a device, or if they prefer, print them. Then there's also the secure PDFs of the math and ELA, the paper copy that I mentioned earlier too. But again, all of these are secure and require shredding upon completion of the assessment. We've had some calls about students who the district's telling us are eligible for the alternate assessment, but when they go to test, the test isn't there. So these are some tips that we have put together for you to make sure you cross all these off, which are reasons why the student would not have a test appear for them. And again, we've harped on the alternate assessment eligibility form being submitted into the data entry interface. And again, if it was not submitted by March 1st, then the DA or the TEA should have called the CAI help desk to ensure that the alternate indicator is set to yes. If that didn't occur, then the only test that would be available for that student would be the standard assessments. And the other factor would be, has the test administrator received the alternate assessment training and passed that requirement? Because if they do not have that training, they will not be able to administer the test. And if they do not have a TEA user role, they wouldn't be able to administer the test. The other reason is we've had districts, the test administrator is not going to the right area to access the test. Because they submitted the form in the DEI, sometimes they go to the DEI thinking the test would be there. That's not the case. So just like the other assessments, you want to go to the test administration card, which is available in the portal. Again, you want to make sure that the student's device has the up-to-date secure browser installed as well. And this last bullet, I want to emphasize a little bit because we're seeing some things come up around this. So if the student was approved for the early stopping rule, and so far, because the KELP window closed, that was the first alternate assessment. So many of your English learners, or not many, a small number of your English learners were approved for the early stopping rule, meaning that they did not have the appropriate ability to communicate their responses on the assessment. So they were approved for the early stopping rule, meaning that the KELP test, the CTA test, and the CTAS test, they would stop right there after they were approved. The TEA would not need to administer the CTAA or the CTAS because the student already demonstrated that they didn't have the ability to respond. So those tests would not be available for those students. We have had some situations where the student was approved for the KELP test for the early stopping rule, and I'm not sure if the teacher was not aware of this or a different teacher may have submitted the form, but they have administered this, for example, the CTAS and submitted the score worksheet. So you don't want to have that happen. Typically, they're not going to be able to access the test once they're approved. They're going to get a pop-up message saying no test available. So you want to make sure that you as a DA consider looking in the test status code area, and any student with the code of 102 was approved for the early stopping rule, and those teachers should not be administering the CTAA or CTAS. Okay. And this slide we kept in the system as well, just as a reference for you, the materials related to the alternate assessment for your reference and for your TEA's reference. Any questions?
As a reminder, and Janet, thanks for your awesomeness in covering all those slides. It's always amazing. I learn something every time I'm at the office hours, so thank you. Any questions for the office hours team? I know Janet and Christy and Jeff, Greg, and Jen are here if you have any questions. Okay, I think that does it. Thanks again to Janet, thank you, and thank you to my colleagues at CSDE and CAI. Thanks everyone, and thank you all for attending today, and we'll see you next week. Have a great afternoon. Thank you.
Take care. Bye.